The toaster clicks before the sun is fully up. That's what I remember first. Not a fight, not a sentence, just that small mechanical sound breaking the quiet. My mother stands at the counter in her pale blue robe, spreading butter across toast with careful, even strokes. She always does it the same way, edge to edge, no corners missed. The knife makes a soft scraping sound against the bread, slow, methodical. I'm at the doorway, leaning against the frame. She doesn't look at me. She knows I'm there. I know she knows. The air shifts slightly when someone enters a room, but her eyes stay on the toast as if it requires full concentration. I wait. There used to be a version of me that would fill this silence. I would comment on the weather, ask about her sleep, mention something I'd done the day before, offer information like a trade. This morning, I don't. I just watched the butter melt in the heat. It surprises me, not the silence, but the absence of panic inside it. No tightening in my chest, no urge to earn something, not even disappointment, just observation. She places the toast on a plate, walks past me without brushing my shoulder, and I realize, very calmly, that something between us has already ended. Neither of us has said it yet. I remember the girl I used to be. She had polished shoes and perfectly tied braids, homework stacked neatly, pencils aligned like soldiers. She smiled when she was supposed to, laughed lightly at jokes she didn't find funny. She spoke softly, moved carefully, as though each motion might tip a balance she didn't understand. Every good grade was a question. Is this enough? Every clean room, every obedient nod, another attempt to fill a hollow she couldn't name. She thought if she performed well enough, someone, anyone, might see her, might choose her. Birthday mornings, she'd unwrap presents with exaggerated delight, even when her mother barely looked up. Dinner conversations were recited scripts, polite responses, soft opinions, a steady rhythm that would not jar the edges of the household. She learned quickly that the smallest misstep could ripple into hours of correction or quiet disapproval. Forget a comma, spill a glass, suddenly she became too loud, too careless, too visible. And yet she kept performing, and always performing, not for fun, not for herself, but because in that silence, in the subtle shifts of glances and sighs, she had begun to map the landscape of affection. Love, if you could call it that, was conditional, and she memorized every rule. The girl who performed, who practiced gratitude, who rehearsed joy, she was still in me, quietly, but I notice now how weary she had become. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Every effort had been a question, and the answer never came. I remember the afternoon she praised Claire. We were at a school recital, the kind where chairs scrape against the floor and parents murmur over programs. Claire stepped onto the stage, her violin held like a promise. My mother's eyes lit up, the corners crinkling in a way I had never seen for me. "She's so talented," my mother said, voice warm, almost proud. I smiled, though the gesture felt foreign on my own face. My own performance had ended moments before, and when I approached her, she gave a small nod. "That's good," she said, and returned her attention to the other girl, as if my presence was just noise in the room. I couldn't understand it then. I catalogued every nuance, the way her gaze lingered on Claire, the subtle straightening of her posture, the soft exhalation of delight. And there I was, precise, careful, obedient, fading into the background like a shadow. It was years before I recognized the pattern. Not cruelty, not malice, just withholding. A slow economy of attention and affection dispensed selectively. Praise and warmth arrived only when she deemed it deserved, and I was always in the waiting room of her approval. The memory presses against me now in quiet ways. A laugh too soft, a compliment never offered, a hand not reached out. Absence is louder than shouting. You feel it in the empty spaces at the table, in the way chairs remain unpulled, in the pause that stretches too long when she could have said something, anything. It taught me early that love was a currency, and I had been bankrupt, trying to pay off a debt that never existed. And yet I learned to perform, to mimic contentment, to survive in the gaps. Even now, thinking back, the ache is subtle, like an echo in a room you no longer enter, quiet, persistent, undeniable. It was a Tuesday, the kind that feels ordinary until it isn't. She glanced at the dinner table and frowned. "You left the napkins unfolded," she said, her voice calm as if she were reading from a script. I froze for a fraction of a second, expecting the old reflex, an explanation, an apology, a justification. My shoulders tightened, my tongue prepared its rehearsed lines. But then I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't fix. She waited, as if expecting a reaction. I offered none. Just silence. The moment stretched, quiet and almost fragile. I felt the small pulse of power behind my stillness. Not rebellion in the dramatic sense. No yelling, no slammed doors, no visible defiance. Just absence. Withholding myself. Not performing. Not bending to fill her expectation. She finally exhaled, muttered something about carelessness, and turned away. The sentence hung, unfinished, but I didn't chase it, didn't patch it. And I noticed it then, sharply, a shift. The rules I had followed my entire life, perform, explain, earn acknowledgement, no longer applied. I could stand there, still, unresponsive, and nothing catastrophic happened. For the first time, I felt the possibility of control without confrontation, the quiet satisfaction of choosing when to invest myself and when not to. It was subtle, barely noticeable to anyone else, but inside me, it was the beginning of a new rhythm. My heartbeat aligned with it, slow and steady, like I was finally learning a language I had been too afraid to speak. I started small. A text left unread, a story about my day withheld, the casual updates I used to send, victories, minor annoyances, even questions about what to cook, stopped. I didn't announce it. I didn't frame it as a decision. I just stopped. The first week, nothing happened. My mother's life went on as if my silence was a minor ripple in her routine. I noticed her glance at the phone, the brief pause before she put it down, but she said nothing. I had expected disappointment, a mild worry, maybe even anger. Instead, there was almost nothing. And that was the point. The second week, a small irritation crept in, a pointed comment during dinner. "Didn't you tell me you were going to that meeting?" I shrugged. "I didn't think it was important," I said, neutral. The words felt foreign, detached. And yet, for the first time, the silence stretched longer than usual. Her brow furrowed. She shifted in her chair. glanced at me in a way that suggested she was calculating, wondering. By the third week, subtle unease replaced irritation. A compliment to me felt strained, hollow. Questions came, but only after pauses long enough to make the timing feel off. She noticed me, but differently. Not the obedient girl who filled in every silence, anticipated every mood, laughed when expected. This was someone else, someone who existed outside her frame, who no longer sought her calibration. I watched it unfold quietly, almost scientifically. No confrontation, no arguments, no explanations, just a measured retreat, a removal of access. And in that distance, I realized the slowest form of influence is absence. It doesn't scream, it doesn't hit, it unsettles, it shifts the balance. It teaches patience and observation. I began to see her in tiny, awkward movements, adjusting to a daughter who no longer asked permission to exist. And I felt something unfamiliar, the quiet satisfaction of control without words. The visit was unplanned, though it never truly is with her. She arrived in the late afternoon, her bag slung carelessly over one shoulder, eyes scanning for signs of the girl she thought she knew. I met her in the doorway, coffee in hand, the quiet hum of the house settling between us. For a moment we stood there, two shapes in a familiar frame, but neither filling the space with the old scripts. She glanced around, noticing the small changes, the arrangement of books on the shelf, the way the sunlight fell differently on the table. Then her gaze found me. "Why don't you tell me things anymore?" Her voice was calm, but a flicker of something, irritation, surprise, maybe confusion, shone through. I set the mug down, letting the warmth seep into the counter. I considered answering as I used to, rehearsed explanations, carefully phrased justifications, softening truths to make them palatable. But that version of me no longer existed. "I didn't think you were interested," I said. Silence. Not the kind that empties a room, the kind that presses in, heavy, letting every unspoken sentence settle. She shifted, blinked, as if realizing, finally, that the absence she had cultivated had weight, that the girl she assumed would always perform, always explain, always fill the gaps, had stopped doing so. No shouting, no accusations, just a pause long enough for understanding to begin, and perhaps too late to alter what had already shifted. I didn't soften. I didn't apologize. I just let her sit in the space I had claimed, a quiet, deliberate distance. And in that stillness, I felt the subtle thrill of control. Not revenge in fury, but revenge in presence withheld. The scales had tilted, and I was no longer the child trying to balance them. She started noticing me differently, though it was subtle at first. A comment on my cooking, a question about a meeting I had mentioned once, a small, tentative attempt to laugh at something I found funny. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just tiny gestures, like she was testing the water she long neglected to enter. I observed quietly. There was no rush to respond, no hunger for her approval. I let her efforts land where they would, like leaves settling on water. Some floated, some sank. I didn't reach for them. The satisfaction wasn't in proving her wrong. It wasn't in making her feel regret. It was in the realization that I had finally constructed a boundary she could not cross without invitation, that the power she once held through absence and selective attention had shifted, and now lived entirely with me. She tried, awkwardly, late. like someone fumbling to play a song they'd never learned. And I let her, because letting her notice too late was the point. I didn't need her warmth anymore. I didn't need her gaze, her words, or her approval. I had built myself in the space she never offered, and in that quiet, deliberate presence, I was complete. No triumph, no celebration, just calm, control, the sweetest kind. Sometimes, late at night, I think about her differently. Maybe she loved me in the only way she knew how: clipped words, withdrawn gestures, praise measured like currency. It's possible she tried, just poorly, or too quietly, or too late. But I don't shrink anymore. I don't compress myself to fit the space she designed. I occupy my own room, my own silence, my own warmth. That is enough. And I wonder, quietly, for anyone still performing, still bending themselves to meet someone else's scarce attention. If you're still trying, maybe ask yourself who you're shrinking for. No one hears me say it, not even her. It's a reflection cast in private. I have what I never had before: presence, self-possession, a calm that doesn't depend on someone else's approval. And in that quiet, I am whole.